This is a much anticipated film in large part because of the millennia-long attraction of this story. I'm Kim Shelton. I am an expert on ancient Greece, especially Aegean prehistory. This is Academic Review, the Christopher Nolan Odyssey, the trailer. The trailer begins on what seems to be the battlefield of Troy. Most people would already be familiar with the story of the war itself. The original Odyssey material, an oral poem for a very long period of time, tales that were always told and retold before it was finally written down. One thing though we should keep in mind is we don't know for certain that there was a Trojan War the way that it was portrayed in Homer, and archaeologically we believe that there were probably many wars at Troy, and so what comes out in the epic story is a conflation of what may have gone on for hundreds of years. This is our first true glimpse at the armor that they're using.
After years of war,
which is very much a fantasy. It is based on later classical period armor. We believe the Trojan War likely happened during the late Bronze Age, from about 1500 to 1100 BCE. And the classical period is essentially the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. So 1,000 years difference. This tall figure in black is meant to be Agamemnon, who was the ruler of the Greeks and was from the city of Mycenae, which is actually where I excavate. On a side note, I work at Agamemnon's home. Most of the helmets that we find are more like an upside down bowl. And the alternative is we have leather caps, which have sewn on them pieces of boar's tusks. And we do find those, both types, although I'd say actually the boar's tusk survives a little better than the bronze. This helmet that Agamemnon is wearing with very sculpted to the cheekbones and all that, that is not something that would have been produced in the ancient period. I have to say that what Odysseus is wearing here is actually much closer to what the original artifact might have looked like from, let's say, the 5th century. But yeah, Agamemnon overall, I don't know. The story is part fantasy, so if you're expecting it to be a totally accurate documentary of the way that the Trojan War would have been and our warriors would have looked, then that's really impossible. From what I can tell, the way they're portraying Ithaca in his palace is not it's not terrible. It's not great. This is not a real place. This has got to be CGI. To me, it looks a lot like Mycenae and a lot like the Acropolis in Athens, which many people, of course, are familiar with. But what most people don't realize is that it, in fact, started out as a Mycenaean palace. From what little I can see of Anne Hathaway, I think it's fine, actually. The styles, the color palette, those were all things that would have been fine and that we know actually from Bronze Age wall paintings where we see most women depicted like that in dress. They usually have very long hair in very complicated braids and different systems, so the idea that her hair is braided up around her head I think seems very appropriate. And we do have a good bit of jewelry. A lot of it is gold. They seem to have particularly liked the combination of yellow and blue. We find most of the jewelry is a combination of lapis lazuli in blue, the blue stone, and gold. The sea is the connector in this part of the Mediterranean, and it's actually easier to get places on the sea than it is to travel overland. It's also a major character. He's not just battling monsters, he's battling gods, and he's battling the elements, all of those things together. Poseidon can take revenge against him by enraging the sea. More ships in the Bronze Age were wind-powered, which is why they have big sails. There was a rudder, there were some oars, but mostly they would have traveled using the sails and using the wind, which also, of course, determines the directionality that you can sail based on prevailing winds. And, of course, the famous story about how the warriors couldn't leave for Troy because the wind had stalled, that the goddess Artemis was angry at Agamemnon and had stalled the wind, so they literally could not sail. That's a big difference here. There's a real emphasis on this large number of men who are sitting at the benches and they're rowing following the ship. I think this horse looks ridiculous. I'm really sorry that this horse looks ridiculous. It looks like a Roman statue. But there's a lot of thoughts about what this story of the horse is actually meant to indicate. This is one of Odysseus's tricks. It's always a bit ironic that they spent 10 years trying to battle their way into Troy, and in fact it takes a trick to actually get the deed done. Was there an actual horse? It's hard to say. I find it very difficult to believe that they would have been able to construct something in secret in which a whole group of warriors would have been able to hide in. The movie Troy, I think, is actually much more successful at looking at what would a horse look like if you built it from ships, from the remains of burned out, broken ships. And this one does not look like that. I'm very interested in this segment of the story, in this segment of the film, because this is Odysseus telling a story about the terrible things that went on and that he had to surpass. And in fact, he's doing it to an audience that doesn't know who he is. But it's also extremely dangerous for him to reveal who he is. But the Cyclops is a real turning point in the story, in part because it's when Odysseus sees for himself this vast difference between civilization and barbarism, and this is part of his journey as well. And that every time he reacts like a warrior against something, it in fact is worse. This is when the Cyclops comes in and eats his companions. One of the things that every hero has to do in the classic hero's tale has to cheat death. The Greeks' version of the underworld, literally being under the world, but that it was almost felt like being in a vacuum. It was a nothingness. It was a void. The overall underlying message is the Greeks didn't think death was something you should look forward to in any way, and that you needed to enjoy your life, and that every moment was important. And so they emphasized things like every day and bigger and better and wealthier and more famous. So it's a very different concept than any Judeo-Christian tradition that many of our stories are also then based on, this idea that it's a death or the underworld or the afterlife is a reflection of our lives. And this is literally, it's the opposite of that. One of the fascinating things about the story, and I really hope this comes across in the film as well, is the strong female characters that actually determine Odysseus's journey in so many ways. And it includes his wife, but also Circe, also Calypso, the goddess Athena as well. These are all strong females who help him develop into a normal human being again, get home, and of course Penelope, for him to be accepted at home, that she is the figure that's the constant and has to accept him and recognize him and reinstate him in their lives. I'm hoping that people go in with an open mind to not just dissect every single detail, which, we like to do, but understand it more about the effect of the story. He's a man who's been at war, who wants to go home and is afraid that that's going to be a difficult journey and a difficult transformation. We can all relate to that. That's still a really fun element of this story, is that this time period is still not totally understood. We're still learning all the time about what these people were like and how their lives were. When we're excavating and sifting through the earth, it's the ultimate detective story because you find evidence in pieces. It's like a puzzle. You have to put them back together to really understand the people that were there. UC Berkeley's Nemea Center, we've had one dig now for over 30 years in Greece at the site of Nemea. I brought with me an excavation at Mycenae, which I had started when I was a graduate student. We also have an excavation of Bronze Age tombs, where we have excavated quite a number of what we would call warrior graves. But there's really nothing like uncovering something, reaching down, putting something in your hand that someone dropped 3,000 years ago.